Before the land was drained in the 17th century, huge areas of East Anglia were covered in fenland. Today, there are just a few tiny pockets left among the agricultural land reclaimed from the marshes and reed beds. One of them is called Waterland Fen. Such small, isolated pockets are the last refuge of the rich variety of wildlife that once flourished throughout this area. Alder and birch woods provide a safe roost for birds such as the long-eared owl. The dikes and meres teem with insects, fish, and amphibians. The taller trees are the haunt of sparrowhawks, while below them, in the reed beds, reed warblers often play host to a cuckoo chick. These are some of the ancient inhabitants of Britain's Waterland. To maintain the diversity of habitats and wildlife in Waterland Fen, the reserve is intensively managed by English nature. Some areas of reed bed are cut back to promote the growth of smaller plants that would otherwise be stifled by the tall Phragmites reed. The water level is critical at Woodwalton. If it were not carefully controlled, the fen would quickly dry out and many of the fenland plants and animals would disappear. A complex system of dikes, ditches and sluices makes it possible to keep the water at the right level. Along the edges of the dikes grows the great water dock. It's the only food plant of the large copper, one of Britain's rarest butterflies. As the new leaves begin to grow, a tiny caterpillar emerges to feed. It has spent part of the winter underwater, inside an old curled-up leaf, periodically submerged by the rising waters. Smaller than a grain of rice, the caterpillar climbs up to the tender green leaves. By mid-April, many of the birds have well-grown chicks. A long-tailed tit is feeding its young in a dome-shaped nest in the middle of a bramble bush. The nest took 3 weeks to build. It's made of lichens and spiders' webs and lined with feathers. In spite of the effort that went into building it, the nest is used only once. The tits build a new nest each year. The long-eared owls have an easier time. To increase their numbers, they are given ready-made nests, apple baskets put in suitable trees by the warden of the reserve. They normally nest in the abandoned nests of rooks or crows. With 3 large chicks to feed, the adults may be forced to hunt during the day as well as at dusk, scouring the fens for mice, voles, and small birds. The chicks are now almost 3 weeks old. During the next few days, their fluffy down will begin to be replaced by adult feathers. The larvae of the large copper are growing fast. They are now about 1 inch long and velvety green. They are well camouflaged on the great water dock leaves. The best way to find them is by looking for the large holes they make as they feed. In many of the dikes and pools of Woodwalton Fen, late spring is marked by the arrival of the newts. They return to the water to court and breed. The great crested or warty newt is 6 inches long. It's the largest of our 3 species and one of Britain's rarest amphibians. During the breeding season, the male develops a large crest along its back and tail. The female, bulging with eggs, has no crest. She lays her eggs during May and June, but both she and her mate will stay in the water until July or August. In the damp woodlands of the fen, a woodcock sits, perfectly camouflaged, on her nest among the leaves. Her chicks hatched only a few hours ago, but they're ready for their first meal. While their mother is away, the chicks remain silent and motionless to avoid attracting predators. Only when she returns do they emit a faint cheeping sound. The woodcock is hard to see, sitting in the undergrowth. It's an extremely shy bird, but instead of flying when it's disturbed, it sits stock still, relying on its camouflage for safety. "20 feet up in a nearby tree, another clutch of eggs is hatching. This sparrowhawk laid her 4 eggs over a month ago. After 33 days of patient brooding, the chicks are beginning to hatch. The mute swan cygnets hatched 2 days ago. Some of them seem reluctant to take to the water. The parents carry their chicks in this way only during the first 3 or 4 days of their life. After that, the cygnets will have to learn to get their feet wet. The reed-lined dikes of Woodwalton provide a safe nursery for the swan's growing family. Rearing a family in the more open areas is a little more hazardous. Cattle were introduced into the fen to control coarse vegetation such as reeds and sedges, promoting the growth of smaller plants like marsh orchids. One careless step by a bullock could spell disaster for the snipe nesting among the sedge. It could destroy nest and eggs. She appears nervous at the presence of the cattle, as well she might. Her eggs are about to hatch. But the cattle wander off in the other direction, disturbing swarms of mosquitoes as they go. Although they're only a few minutes old and still unsteady on their feet, the snipe chicks are free from their shells. They'll be able to dodge out of the way if the cattle return. They remain close to the nest until the female returns to brood them. During May, many other species of birds are busy raising their offspring. This sedge warbler has 5 chicks to feed. As she lowers a large caterpillar into one of them, the others wait their turn. By the time she has made 4 more trips, the first chick will be hungry again. The reed beds are a rich hunting ground, but the sedge warbler feeds more often in the grassland nearby. As she searches for food, she may be hunted in her turn. A sparrowhawk circles overhead in search of prey. His mate remains at the nest, where 2 of her 4 eggs have hatched. Although sparrowhawks feed almost exclusively on small birds, they usually hunt in woodland, not over the grassland where the sedge warblers forage. While their chicks are growing, though, they must take whatever food they can find. When the chicks are fed, their mother settles down to brood them. An outburst of indignation from nearby comes from a reddish-brown bird, stirred into action by an intruder. A long-eared owl has landed in a bush only feet from the bird's nest, where he and his mate have a brood of chicks. It's a male nightingale, doing his best to drive the owl away with loud alarm calls and flicks of his red tail. When the coast is clear, both adults continue to feed their chicks. Nightingales nest in dark, well-concealed places on or near the ground, usually among dense vegetation. They are rarely seen and less often filmed because of their secretive nature. They catch insects to feed their chicks in deep cover, hardly ever venturing out into the open. The sound of the nightingale is well known, but because the bird sings from within a dense thicket, most often at night, it's a very uncommon sight. It's now mid-July, and the large coppers are about to emerge. The caterpillars pupated about a month ago on the stems of the great water docks. Once the hard outer shell of the chrysalis is broken open, the adult insect can crawl out, its wings crumpled, but otherwise fully formed. Clear orange forewings show that this is the male of the species. The female large copper has dark markings on her forewings against the same glowing orange background. Large coppers had died out completely in Britain by 1848, mainly because their habitat had been destroyed, but also as a result of over-collecting by Victorian entomologists. In 1927, a few large coppers were brought from Holland and introduced to Woodwalton Fen. With careful management and a captive breeding program supervised by English nature, they have flourished here. The newly emerged butterfly climbs to a suitable spot and begins to inflate its wings, pumping fluid into the veins. When the wings are fully extended, they will dry out, becoming rigid but very light. Meanwhile, the female sparrowhawk is waiting for her mate to bring more food for the chicks. Not long ago, this would have been a rare sight in East Anglia. Sparrowhawk populations declined dramatically in the 1950s because of the use of pesticides on farmland. Since the use of the lethal chemicals was restricted, the number of sparrowhawks has increased. There are now 6 pairs in Woodwalton Fen, their nests evenly spaced across the reserve. The fen is surrounded on all sides by agricultural land, which was once originally fenland too. As it was drained, the peaty soil collapsed to such an extent that it's now 3 feet lower than the fen. The dikes and banks are essential to prevent the fen from drying out. Huge pieces of bog oak, several thousand years old, are often dug up in the fields. They're a relic of the days when this area was covered in forest. They're an ideal basking place for the grass snakes that thrive in the wetlands. The snakes regularly enter the water to hunt newts and frogs. Woodwalton Fen is well known for its insects. Many are very rare, like this dragonfly, a blue chaser. Between periods of sunbathing, it hunts for flying insects, which it eats in mid-air. Spiders, too, catch flying insects, in this case a small damselfly. It's well and truly tangled in the web. No matter how hard it struggles, it won't escape. The male blue chaser has succeeded in finding a partner. When they have finished mating, the female will lay her eggs just below the water surface. The larvae will spend 2 or 3 years underwater before they emerge as adults. It was mainly the insects that prompted the Rothschild family to buy Woodwalton Fen at the turn of the century. They built a bungalow on stilts to stay in when they came to visit. Outside the bungalow, Ron Harold, the warden of the reserve, discovers a tragedy. The female sparrowhawk is dead. She is flown into the window, probably while she was chasing a small bird. This would normally mean that her chicks would starve. A male sparrowhawk has never been known to feed chicks on his own. But this one seems to be an exception to the rule. The chicks are almost as big as he is. He drops his prey into the nest and leaves at once. He could easily find himself caught up in a squabble between the two. The 2 chicks have turned out to be a male and a female. Their size distinguishes them. Male sparrowhawks are smaller than females. The male on the left is already starting to grow proper feathers. His sister, slightly larger and still covered in down, manages to wrest the meal from his grasp. Despite the loss of their mother, these chicks grew up successfully to fledge and fly. Now, at the height of summer, the many rare flowers that grow here are in bloom. The marsh sunflower, with its enormous yellow heads, and the marsh thistle that can grow to 6 feet high. Its flowers attract unusual insects, like this longhorn beetle. Water violets are among the rarities that grow in the dikes. In the surrounding boggy areas, marsh orchids and yellow loosestrife thrive. Bladderwort is an aquatic plant, flowering just above the water surface in much the same way as amphibious bistort, also known as snakeweed. The flowers provide a rich and varied food source for the large coppers, which are now ready to mate. However, because of their conspicuous colors, the butterflies can easily fall prey to insectivorous birds. This enormous cuckoo chick is being fed coppers by a pair of reed warblers who are its unwilling foster parents. In spite of this predation, enough coppers survive each year to provide eggs for the next year's population. The males are territorial, chasing rivals out of the patch they call their own. When the females are ready to mate, they emit a scent that attracts males. A few days after mating, the female will lay her eggs, up to 60 of them, on the leaves of a great water dock. The eggs are almost too small to see with the naked eye. They'll hatch in about 10 days, and the caterpillars will feed for a month or so. Then, at the end of September, they will make their way down to the base of the great water dock plant to hibernate inside a rolled-up leaf until the following April. Overwintering like this is a defense against predators such as birds and small mammals. In a wet winter, the caterpillars might be submerged, but it does them no harm, and they'll emerge the following spring to start the whole cycle again. For thousands of years, this part of East Anglia was home to a rich variety of wildlife. Now it will take careful and constant management to maintain this waterland, one of the last traces of the ancient fenland.